Today we are talking about, well, our topic today is China expensive? Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So what we're going to be doing is we're going to basically be talking about, well, what things cost here in China, and I think a lot of our viewers are going to be surprised because I think there's this overall image that China is a very cheap place.
Right.
You know, that you can come here, everything's cheap, food, electronics, cars, like everything is just much cheaper than overseas.
Right.
And they probably get this idea because everything's manufactured here these days. So,
yeah,
you know, there's probably an idea that because it's made here, you can just pick it up for like next to nothing.
Sure.
But it's actually untrue. So I'm going to start by talking about electronics, right?
Okay.
I know a lot of people, they send me emails and stuff asking, hey, I'm coming to China, should I wait and buy my new iPhone there or my iPad or whatever? You know, should I buy it in China? Will it be cheaper? And the answer is no. In fact, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And, well, it's a little confusing, but I'll try to explain it. I live in Shenzhen, right? Shenzhen is the Silicon Valley of China. It is the most high-tech, most advanced city. It's where all the electronic things in the world are basically made. If you are going to buy an iPhone, it's made in Shenzhen. If you're going to buy a DJI drone, they are made in Shenzhen. Basically, you could probably look on the back of any kind of electronic device and somewhere there it's going to say Shenzhen. And if you want to buy an iPhone in Shenzhen, it's going to cost you about 1,000 RMB more than if you bought it in Hong Kong. So why do you think that is, Seamilk?
Well, it's obviously because in China, they want to promote domestic products, right? So all of these things like that are Japanese, not even manufactured, but Japanese products, Japanese electronics, American electronics, and all this kind of stuff are heavily taxed. So basically local consumers here have to pay a lot more to try to stimulate, you know, the locally made stuff like Xiaomi and those brands.
Correct. Well, you see, here's the thing. When I first moved to Shenzhen, I kept reading in the newspapers that people were caught at the border smuggling SD cards, smuggling smartphones, smuggling just basic electronics into Shenzhen. And I was thinking, why on earth would people be smuggling these things in from Hong Kong when they could just buy them here? You know, surely it's cheaper. But it turns out, because Hong Kong has such a low sales tax, that you pay way less for products in Hong Kong, and of course in the USA as well, you pay way less for big brand name products than you would here in China.
Correct.
So basically that's the deal. Electronics, brand name electronics, are way more expensive in China.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you want to buy some cheap, unknown, no-name brand sort of Android tablet, or you know, some kind of rubbish electronic stuff, LED lights or something, of course it's going to be cheaper here. But anything with a brand name on it that's well known around the world is going to be more expensive in China.
I think we've said this a million times in our videos. If you're buying Chinese, it's cheaper. If you're buying Western, it's always more expensive.
Yeah. Okay, well actually, speaking of that, let's talk about the next thing, which is cars. So go ahead. What can you say about cars?
With a huge auto boom here in China because of the growing middle class, everyone feels like they have to have a car.
Yeah.
Unlike countries like places like Taiwan, where people realize how inconvenient it is with a high population density to have a car, China is the opposite. There's too many people here, and there's a lot of cars on the road, and it's for face, right? So
sure.
It's exactly the same story, Winston, because what happened was China said, yo, we have to promote domestic car brands, right?
Yeah.
And we know the quality of Chinese cars is pretty bad, so Chinese people...
I actually own a Chinese car. Yeah, it is really bad, but hey, I still like it.
Okay. Now, the public's not stupid. Chinese people aren't stupid. They're consumers as well, right? So they didn't take to Chinese brands as much as China thought they would. So what they did was tax the absolute hell out of Western brands and also Japanese branded cars. So that's kind of what happened there. So you can expect to pay a lot more for a real import. However, there's a loophole.
Yep.
What happened was, to get around this heavy taxation, Japanese and American and German companies set up factories here in partnership with the Chinese companies. So you get a lower quality, cheaper version of cars at a much, much lower price, basically.
Yeah, actually, the bikes that we're on are Suzuki Hardwares, which is also a joint venture.
Exactly, and we pay less than you would for a normal Suzuki from Japan.
Yeah, but still way more than a Chinese bike.
Absolutely.
Look, the reason I bought a Chinese car in the first place is because foreign cars were so expensive. I bought it new, and if I were to buy even a second-hand cheap foreign car, it would have cost 3 or 4 times what I paid for my Chinese car.
Exactly. I've owned now Chinese partnership cars, which was my Suzuki, and then the Lexus that I had was unbelievably overpriced compared to what I would have paid for it back home. So again, if you want to live a Western lifestyle here with Western goods, especially in terms of automobiles, you're going to pay out the nose.
Correct. So, Seamilk, you've just spoken about cars, but what about houses, real estate?
Well, this is a bit of a sore subject for me, but actually, if you watch any of the news, you'll know that China's kind of amidst a housing bubble, really. What happened is, because of possibly hundreds or thousands of years of investing in property, because there's never really been any social programs from the government, people have always relied on buying property for as a way to keep their money safe, right?
Yeah.
There's no history of banking or anything like this here, so it was kind of like the foolproof way to keep your money safe. Now, what happened is, if you watch any of our videos, you'll see a lot of our videos include, if you look way off in the distance actually, you'll see a lot of these kind of ghost apartments, and a lot of people had bought these really poor quality apartments as a form of investment and have artificially driven up the prices. So what that means is, let me just put it into real world terms. I have an 80 square meter apartment in the middle of a third tier city in China that costs about $200-something thousand, and my parents have a 400 square meter house that they own in New York State, which is obviously much nicer in every aspect.
Correct.
Can house an entire family, and that kind of gives you some perspective. Don't come here to China thinking property is going to be cheap. It's incredibly expensive and a very poor investment right now.
I agree.
I mean, you live in Shenzhen, right? Like, you know what hyperinflation is.
Correct.
Right.
It's ridiculous how expensive houses have gotten there. Now, I actually spoke fairly in length about the whole real estate situation here in my China versus America video. So I'm just going to put a link for those of you who are interested. You can go and listen to me waffle on about it there. Okay, I suppose let's talk about another thing which we all need to survive, and that is, can you guess?
Food.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, definitely.
I could have said air.
We do need food to survive. Let's not get into the air, okay? But let's talk about food.
Okay.
Now, basically, China's one of those places where you can live very cheaply if you're willing to eat sort of trash, dirty food, okay?
Yep.
Now, you can go around and you can get a meal for 5 RMB if you want, like a really dirty,
under $1.
Yeah, dirty meal. I mean, you've got some sort of like very dirty foreign backpackers who like to do these challenges where they go around and see how little they can spend on their food and stuff
at the expense of their liver and spleen.
Every single thing that they're eating is just absolute rubbish. They're really cheap sort of 15 RMB meals, those things, they are very cheaply prepared. The oil is very bad that they use, and if you eat that stuff on a daily basis, you are going to get sick. It's going to destroy your spleen. So
I've been there.
It's not something that I'd recommend. It's good for fun, but you can't really live on that stuff.
No.
So here's where we get into the big problem. Buying healthy food in China is actually very expensive.
Absolutely.
If you want any sort of real organic food that comes from a trusted source, you're going to pay a lot of money, and any kind of Western style food is going to be very expensive because it's seen as exotic here.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about things like steaks, or even just a hamburger is going to be really expensive, unless of course you're willing to settle for McDonald's or something like that, because that's cheap.
Or it's cheap.
Yeah, so food, yes, it's cheap, but it's going to be very unhealthy if you eat cheap. You can go and buy all sorts of fresh vegetables from your local wet market and fresh meat and cook it yourself, but those wet markets where the vegetables and the meat comes from is very suspect, and a lot of the time is going to be toxic and unhealthy for you anyway.
Yeah, a little quip I had actually is a lot of these price charts you see, like cost of living comparisons, are very deceiving, because if you click China, it still looks really, really cheap when you look at produce, but the kind of produce that's on there, the kind of produce that you'd get at a very cheap market, is not the kind that you'd want to put in your body.
Correct.
If you want to see food talked about in more depth and more detail with actual prices, you can go check out my cost of living video that I just did the other week, actually. So here's the link.
Okay, yeah, cool. So, Seamilk, that's pretty much it for today. Is there anything you'd like to say to our subscribers before we sign off?
Although China might not be the cheap dreamland you might have thought it was, I know something that's very cheap, actually free to do, and that is to like, comment, and subscribe to this video.
That's right. And if you don't like, comment, or subscribe, like these lakes, I guess, and not like the weather today. Stay awesome.
When I close my eyes, I can almost see it. When I take a breath, you fill up my lungs.